The wind that morning was dry and restless, carrying with it the scent of iron rails, coal smoke, and the faintest whisper of lilacs that didn't belong to the desert. Colt Maddox stood by the platform of the Lone Creek station, a man built of dust and silence, his hat-shaded eyes that had seen too much, droughts, deaths, and dreams that died quicker than rain in July. He'd worked cattle, buried friends, and spent nights talking to ghosts under the stars. And now, for the first time in years, he was waiting for something alive, or rather someone. The letter he carried in his vest pocket was creased and soft from being read 100 times. Miss Clara Bennett, age 22, honest, God-fearing, able to cook, sew, and work beside her husband. That's all it said. But it was enough. Enough for a man tired of empty sunsets and the ache of loneliness echoing in his chest. The train hissed into the station like a living thing, coughing smoke that blurred the line between heaven and hell. Passengers stepped down, merchants, ranch hands, a preacher, but then she appeared. A woman in a simple brown dress, her hair loose from the wind, her eyes steady as a rifle sight. Colt felt the air punch out of his lungs. He had expected plain, practical, not this. Not a woman whose quiet grace could still the dust itself. She looked around, scanning faces, and when her gaze met his, something in him shifted. For the first time in years, Colt Maddox forgot to breathe. "Mr. Maddox?" she asked, her voice soft but sure. He nodded, removing his hat. "Ma'am, you're Clara?" She gave a small, nervous smile. "I suppose I am, sir. At least I hope you don't regret it already." He chuckled, low and rough, unused to the sound of laughter in his own throat. "Regret? Ma'am, I reckon this might be the best decision I ever made." The first weeks on the ranch were quiet. Clara moved through the cabin with the gentleness of someone who had known both hardship and grace. She cooked simple meals, tended the garden, and learned the rhythm of life under the sun. Colt found himself watching her, not with the hunger of a man, but with the awe of someone witnessing a miracle. She would hum while washing dishes, some hymn from back east, and the sound would drift through the open window and soften the edges of his loneliness. At night, she'd read from a tattered book by lamplight while Colt listened, pretending to mend a saddle strap just so he could stay near her voice. But there were shadows, too. One evening, he found her staring at the fire, her hands trembling. "You're not eating," he said quietly. She flinched. "I'm fine." "Clara," he pressed gently, "something's haunting you." She looked at him then, eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You ordered a wife, Mr. Maddox, but what you got was a woman running from something she can't forget." He didn't ask what. He just sat beside her, close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "You don't have to tell me," he murmured. "Not unless you want to. But you got a home here. Ain't no one gonna hurt you under this roof." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then she whispered, "My name isn't Clara Bennett." The truth came like a storm that had been waiting too long to break. Her real name was Lydia Grace. She'd been born in Missouri, married young, and widowed even younger. Her husband killed in a railroad accident. His family blamed her, called her cursed, and she'd fled west under a false name, answering the ad of a lonely rancher she'd never met. She waited for anger, for judgment, but Colt said nothing. He simply reached over, took her trembling hands in his, and said, "Then Lydia Grace it is. And that's a fine name to have, if you ask me." She cried then, not out of guilt, but out of the shock of being accepted for the first time since her world had fallen apart. Days turned into weeks, and something unspoken grew between them, slow as sunrise, strong as oak roots. They worked side by side, shared coffee at dawn, and watched the mountains turn gold in the evening light. Then, one afternoon, a storm rolled down from the north. The sky went black, the wind howled like a wounded beast, and a flash flood tore through the valley. Lydia screamed for the horses, and Colt ran into the rain, fighting to cut the fence and drive the animals to high ground. Lightning split the sky, and he fell hard in the mud, his leg trapped under a fallen post. Lydia didn't hesitate. She ran to him, soaked to the bone, tugging at the heavy timber until her hands bled. "I won't lose you too," she cried, voice raw with fury and love. With one final pull, the post shifted and Colt was free. They stumbled back to the cabin, collapsing by the fire, shaking and laughing through tears. And in that moment, muddy, breathless, alive, Colt finally said the words that had been burning in him since the day she stepped off that train. Lydia Grace. I reckon I didn't order a bride. God just sent me the piece of my soul I'd been missing. She smiled, brushed his wet hair from his forehead, and whispered. Then I reckon he knew exactly what he was doing. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the world washed clean. The air smelled of pine and promise. Colt wrapped an arm around her, and together they watched the dawn return, gold spilling across the land like forgiveness. Two broken souls, mended by love and the wild mercy of the West the morning after. The rain felt as though the earth had washed away its sins. The dust had settled, and the scent of pine and wet soil drifted softly through the air. Colt Maddox sat at the doorway of his cabin, sipping his coffee, while Lydia Grace wiped her hands clean on a pile of firewood. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had become its own language. A language that needed no words, no promises, just glances, breaths, and that quiet peace only true hearts can share. Lydia had become a part of that home. The smell of her hands lived in the food. Her humming filled the evening stillness, and her laughter had found its way into the very walls that had known only the touch of wind for years. But in Colt's heart, one question kept stirring. Was she truly happy? Was this land, this solitude, this rugged life meant for a woman who had once belonged to the brightness of the city? One night when the moon was half hidden behind clouds, Colt asked, Lydia, if you'd like, I can send you back to the city. There's a better life there for someone like you. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Colt, I came to this land running away, but I think this is the first place I've ever stopped. Why would I go back to a place where my heart never belonged? Colt looked at her. The flicker of the candlelight played across her face, but the peace shining in her eyes felt like something heaven sent. For the first time, he reached out and held her hands. I asked for you through a letter, he said softly. But maybe God sent you to heal the parts of me I couldn't mend myself. Lydia whispered. And maybe I found in you the home I spent my whole life searching for. Days passed. Winter crept closer. Snow began to crown the mountains like silver fire. One afternoon, a rider arrived from town, bringing mail. When Colt opened the envelope, his eyes widened. The letter was addressed to Lydia from Clayton Bennett, the very family she had once fled from. The letter was short. Lydia, if you're alive, know that we have forgiven you. Your name is cleared of all blame. You may come home. Lydia read the letter and went silent. Colt said nothing. He simply stepped outside and stood in the open field for a long time, staring at the sky. A strange ache filled his chest. He had given her freedom, but freedom often means letting go. Late that night, when he returned, she was standing by the door, the letter in her hand. Colt, she said quietly, I've made my decision. A slow pain rose in his chest, but he kept his face calm. Then you should go, if that's what your heart tells you. She took a step closer. My heart tells me to stay where peace lives. And that place is here, with you. Colt blinked, as if waking from a dream. Lydia placed her hand against his chest. I came here running from life, she said. But with you I learned how to live again. And if I ever leave, it'll be only with you. He took her hand gently, and at that very moment snow began to fall outside, soft, white, and silent, as though the heavens themselves were blessing their choice. Months passed. Winter settled deep into the valley. Together they chopped wood, fed the animals, and spent the evenings by the fire telling stories. Sometimes Lydia would put on his hat, laughing mischievously. Colt Maddox, your wife's becoming half a cowgirl now. He'd chuckle and reply, No, you've turned this place into half of heaven. One morning, as the sun gleamed across snow-covered peaks, Colt sat on the porch with Lydia in his arms. Gazing at the mountains, he said quietly, I used to think life was a battle, but you've taught me that sometimes a heart doesn't need armor. It just needs a smile. Lydia smiled softly. And sometimes the greatest victory is when you love someone enough to let them go, and they choose to return. The air was cold, but their hearts were warm. Sunlight spilled gold over the mountains, as if God himself was showering them with grace. And so two lonely souls, bound by letters and silence, finally found their home in each other's arms. Closing narration, voiceover. Love doesn't come on command. It breathes slowly over time. Colt and Lydia's story reminds us that sometimes we don't go searching for love. It finds us walking down the lonely roads of our lives. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because more tales of love The Wild West and Destiny's quiet miracles are on their way.